All right, I figured it out eventually. Eventually, I get it. Okay. Somehow, every time they figure out a way to make it more complicated, but I think we're finally live. Okay, let me just share 1 second. Share and share. One more, of course, because it's for good measure. 1 second. Okay, and this is going to be the last one. Share. Okay. Share now. Okay. All right. I think we're all set up. Everybody can see me? Even those of you back there?
Yeah.
You can see me
Having a
too?
little trouble.
You're having the most trouble, huh? Okay. I'm really excited about tonight because it's an exciting topic. It's a topic that's timely and it's a little bit different than our usual just classic Torah studies over here. Let me just switch I think it's the gain over here. When I have this Letterman mic over here, it's interesting. Okay, you can still hear me? I still sound fine? Or as good as I can ever sound, right? So good evening, everybody. It's good to see you here. I've got 3 classes planned for pre-Pesach. Oh, I have copies in the copy machine. Sorry about that.
No,
I've got 3 classes planned for pre-Pesach. There's today, which is a little bit more, you might say, fun. And it's all about the rise of machine-made matzahs. And then, of course, we'll have the next 2 weeks, we'll focus a little bit more on the practical, getting ready for Pesach and running an actual Seder, both insightful for the seasoned veteran and for somebody doing it new. Don't forget this year, there's something special in that we have Passover starts on a Friday night, which creates its own questions and comments and things that we have to do. That being said, a couple of reminders. If you haven't yet ordered your Shmur Matzah, please do so ASAP. If you haven't yet, sorry, I'm just trying to get it in the perfect exact place that you can, okay. We also have, if you need to sell your chametz, make sure you do that. If you need to, what else? Matzah chametz, come for the Seder, you can do that. Come for the Mashiach Mo, which we'll talk about another time. Okay. So as usual, we're going to start with a joke. Don't know if it's funny or not, but let's start with this. Why isn't matzah popular outside of the Jewish community? Why isn't matzah popular outside the Jewish community? It's a joke, by the way. It's not necessarily true, as we'll actually see in the class. It's really bad because it's never been on the rise. Okay, sorry about that one. And the other one is, how do you drive your mother crazy on Pesach? It's a piece of cake. Okay, all right. So we're ready to go. We're ready to rumble. The holiday of Pesach is fast approaching, and everybody is running to clean their houses, buy their Pesach fare, and none more famous of the Pesach fare than our most famous Pesach fare, and that is, of course, our wonderful, wonderful matzah. And as you can see over here, you've got the class today is called The Rise of Machine Matzahs. And I should really, sorry, I'm sharing the wrong one. The Rise of Machine Matzahs. Just trying on my end. Okay, The Rise of Machine Matzahs. I don't know why I can't see it properly here, but okay, here's what it is. The evolution of the humble matzah. So we have today 2 types of matzahs. One is the square matzah, which is cheap, if there is such a thing as anything that's cheap anymore, but as cheap as anything can get. Then we have the round handmade, which is expensive. And we're going to try and figure out, why is it that the handmade matzah is so expensive? Is it really better? How did it evolve that square matzah has become popular? And is there really a need to ever have that round, expensive one? Or is it just so the rabbi can have something to do before Pesach to keep himself busy? So, of course, that is a consideration. But we will note that, okay, I want to note a couple differences. There isn't just handmade versus machine matzah. Within that, there is another subcategory, and that is called, by the way, you should know a lot of matzah on the shelves today is not even kosher for Passover. So if you do buy machine matzah, check very carefully. Even when in public, sometimes in the kosher Passover for aisle, the matzah there is not always kosher for Passover. Not all matzah is kosher for Passover. Because in order for something to be kosher for Passover, it needs to not rise, which means certain rules have to be followed, 18-minute cooking. So the first thing is, obviously, get kosher for Passover matzah. But assuming you're buying kosher for Passover matzah, there is boxed matzah, which is called KFP, kosher for Passover, non-shemura matzah. Okay? And we will discuss throughout the class what exactly is shemura matzah. Then you have, all right, here we're pointing out. Then we have shemura machine-made matzah. There is something that is, it's machine-made matzah, but it is shemura matzah. So what's the issue here? Possibly because for the machine, some people leave it by the Seder. And then, of course, you have handmade machine matzah and the deficiency. I don't know why it says that. Not sufficiently shmura. But regardless, within shmura, as we will see, there's also subcategories. Oh, I see. Within shmura means that it's been guarded. And as we'll describe, it's been guarded from when? In other words, if I want to make matzah, can I just go to Publix, buy some flour, and make matzah out of it? Or does that flour have to have a kosher Passover symbol on it? And that's all the different things we are going to talk about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is obviously matzah originally was handmade. Let's take a look at some text over here. So I'm going to share, and let me know if on your screen, has it switched to the textbook on the screen? Yes, okay, good. All right, so we're in the right place. So let's take a look over here. Text number 1. It's like this, and this is from the Bible. Anybody heard of it? It's one of the best-selling books of all times. Okay, so the Bible says like this, and this is from the book of Shemot, Exodus 12:15-18. And it says like this. For 7 days you shall eat. Oh, by the way, before I continue reading, which army base are you not allowed to celebrate Passover at? Fort Leavenworth. Apparently there is a place. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to continue. I was saying that because I saw the word leaven. All right. For 7 days, you shall eat unleavened cakes. So what does unleavened mean? It means it didn't rise. Today we put yeast in everything. So it automatically rises very quick. However, even if you don't put yeast within your dough, it can rise after a certain period of time. Hence the advent of the ever popular today sourdough, which does not have yeast, but nevertheless rises. So it continues. For 7 days, you shall eat unleavened cakes. But on the preceding day, it's funny we call matzah a cake, but on the preceding day, you shall clear away all leaven from your houses. So the 7 days, Passover is actually 7 days. We celebrate 8 days in the diaspora, but originally it is 7 days. And it says the day before Passover, you got to clear out your house from anything that is chametz, anything that is leavened. For whoever eats leaven from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. So eating leavened breads during the 7 days of Passover and today 8 days, not a great idea. Then he continues, and on the first day, there shall be a holy convocation, meaning the first day is the holiday. That's the day we don't do any work this year, which is Shabbat, so we're not working anyways. And on the 7th day, you shall have a holy convocation. No work may be performed on them, but what is eaten by any soul, that alone may be performed for you. And I'm not going to get into details of what that is referring to, but regardless, what we're saying here is that the first day and the last day are holiday, and there's the in the between days, which are known as intermediate days. Then he continues. And here's an important line. And you shall watch over the unleavened cakes, for on this very day I have taken your legions out of the land of Egypt, and you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting statute. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, so it's the Jewish month, the first month is the month of Nisan, 14th day of the month. In the evening, you shall eat unleavened cakes until the 21st day in the evening. So there's a couple important lines that we said here. The first one was in the previous paragraph where it says, and you shall watch over the unleavened cakes. That's where the name shmura comes from. If you ever heard the word shmura, which means guarded, that is from this verse. And you shall watch over the cakes. In the original Hebrew, ushmartem es hamatzot, you shall guard the matzot. So when you hear the word shmor matzah, this is where it's coming from. I'm not explaining yet what it means, shmor matzah, but you can already see from the verse how you have to guard it. And so what does it mean to guard it? We will discover a little bit later. The other thing I want to point out is that although here it says you shall eat matzah for all 7 days, there's another verse which implies that it doesn't mean you have to eat matzah for 7 days. What it means is if you are going to eat any bread, it has to be matzah. But you don't have to eat matzah every single day of Passover. The only time where it is obligatory to eat matzah is the Seder night, which in the diaspora is 2 nights. But in other words, technically you don't need to eat any matzah during the 7 days. You only have to eat the first 2 nights. That being said, of course, if one is making a holiday meal, meals always have challah. So on Pesach, we will substitute it with matzah. But the biblical obligation of eating matzah only applies on the first night, and of course, in the diaspora, the second night of Passover. So this is all the basis. This verse is the basis of the matzah. And as you can imagine, matzah historically, since it's a commandment, Jews have been making it. If we need it, we make it, right? If you need a sukkah, there's now sukkah centers. If you need hamantashen, there are places that make hamantashen. Well, if you need matzah, there are places that make hamantashen. But originally, just like everybody makes their own challah every week, people would make their own matzah every week. So let's. Where am I? I lost my mouse. Yeah, hopefully, Cat doesn't find it. Okay. So text number 2, and this is from the Code of Jewish Law. And here he talks about the matzah that was made personally by people. And he says like this. So this is the greatest scholars would make an effort to be personally involved in baking the matzot for the mitzvah. They would supervise the workers, encouraging them, helping them. It is proper for every person to do the same, to personally involve himself in a mitzvah. For so it is with all mitzvot. It is better to perform a mitzvah personally than through an agent. And so again, doing a mitzvah is always best to be done by yourself. You don't want to do a mitzvah. Have someone else do it if you can do it. The Talmud talks about how the greatest of sages would clean their houses for Shabbat. And so similarly over here, if you can make the matzah yourself, you should. And obviously, if you're making the matzah yourself, you are doing it by hand. And historically, machines are obviously a recent invention. And therefore, we would say that matzah was always made by hand. I shouldn't say always. For many, many, many generations, it was made by hand. Originally, like I said, people would make it in their own homes. Eventually, bakeries came about, eliminating the need for every single person to bake their own matzah. And the matzah that was done in those bakeries was also done by hand. And as we mentioned earlier, it's best to be done by yourself. In fact, there's a story with my great-grandfather. He was in yeshiva in I think it's Belarus, somewhere over there. Was a Chabad yeshiva, and when he came to the yeshiva, the head rabbi there said, "Oh, he looks a little coarse. We got to make him work. We got to make him work to do a mitzvah." So he was given the hardest jobs in the matzah bakery. It's a story in Chabad literature. He was given the hardest jobs in the matzah bakery, and afterwards, the Rebbe at that time, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, said about him, "Oh, the sweat and the toil of the mitzvah refined him." And so again, we see this idea of doing a mitzvah yourself is best. And in fact, so is the custom today. Many, many Jews who live in larger cities where there is a matzah bakery, you can actually go with your family or your yeshiva or your synagogue, and you can rent out parts of the matzah bakery. They're obviously not going to let you put the matzah in the oven. You're not that talented. But they will let you go in there and roll and hole punch and stuff like that. So you can actually get involved in the actual baking of the matzah. When I was younger in yeshiva, I used to do that. I shouldn't say when I was younger, I'm not that old, but back in the day when I was in yeshiva, I used to do it. Of course, now I'm here, I don't have time to go to the matzah bakery, or I don't have a matzah bakery around here to go to. So that's the story with the original matzah bakery. So again, to recap, we've read that the Torah tells us that for 7 days we cannot have any leavened bread in our house. We should have matzah. I explained how we don't have to eat matzah every single day of Pesach. It's only if we want to eat bread, it should be the matzah style. However, the nights of the Seder, you must eat matzah. It's a mitzvah to eat matzah then. And we also read a curious verse which says, you shall watch over, you shemurah, you shall guard over the unleavened cakes, and we will get into that soon. But let's talk a little bit of history. With the Industrial Revolution, something happened that changed the Jewish world in many, many different ways, and no more so than the humble matzah. Let me ask a question to the crowd. What year do you think the first machine-made matzah was made? Put in the chat or in person, whatever you want to go for it. Any guesses? No? No guesses? It's just a guess. You're not beholden to anything. 1927, 1920. Okay. People go with the Industrial Revolution. Okay.
I was going to say that also early 20s, early 1920, early 1900s. You know.
Yeah, everybody's saying early 1900s. Interesting. Hey, why are you all like reading the Manischewitz box or something? Okay.
Probably.
Actually, Manischewitz for the 1920s, as we'll get to. But you'd be surprised to know. You saying the 1500s? You're going with the advent of the printing press, then.
Sure, there we go.
Okay.
Basically
Okay.
that then.
All right. Fair enough. The actual answer is 1838. The year 1838 was the first machine-made matzah. Now, mind you, it wasn't a complete machine-made matzah. It was more a machine that could, I guess, barely mix the dough for you. Don't forget, matzah has many components to it. Okay, if you've ever been to a factory, I'll just describe to you. There's these two rooms, one with flour, one with water. People pouring from the two rooms into the middle. There's a bowl there, pouring the flour in the water. There's a guy there who mixes it, and it's not easy to knead. And don't forget, you're on a timer, 18 minutes. So he kneads and kneads and kneads. Then they take that dough and they throw it to different tables, and people over there roll the dough out into circles. After they're done rolling it out, someone will drape it over like a very long rolling pin. It could hold maybe 5 matzahs. They'll take that rolling pin to a very hot oven and roll them out in the oven. The ovens today are so hot, they'll cook in a minute. Then they take like a pan scooper and take it out. Oh yeah, I forgot. Before they go on that thing, before they go on the long rolling pin, they need to have hole punches. So there's many, many areas of it. And so eventually a guy called Isaac Singer living in France invented the first machine for baking matzah in 1838. Obviously, there was an oven, right? So what did he invent? He invented a very basic part of the process, which was literally just the mixing. Okay, but again, the mixing is a hard part. If you can get a machine to do it, I'm not even sure if it was electric or not. I don't recall. Maybe it was just somebody turning something or whatever it was. And as you can imagine, if there's anything new in the Jewish world, all hell broke loose. And there was automatically a civil war between all the rabbis. And that's what we're going to discover today, just exactly the rabbinic back and forth going on. So this was in France. Now you have to understand historically, the Jewish communities of France, Germany, were slightly different than the communities of Ukraine and Poland and parts of Russia. That France and Germany were considered more modern. And so you can imagine that they were a little far from the real hardcore Polish and Ukrainian and Russian Jewish communities. However, by 1856, a Jewish baker in Vienna, which is getting a little bit closer, he created a more efficient machine. And now that there's a more efficient machine, that new machine soon reached Poland and Galicia. And once it reached Poland and Galicia, the hardcore, that is when the Jewish Civil War began. So don't forget, the United States Civil War began in 1861. So there was, to an extent, a Jewish Civil War. Let's turn up my ringer. And that's when the Jewish Civil War came out. And we'll start today with a very famous text of a rabbi called Rabbi Shlomo Kluger. Anybody knows what Kluger means in Yiddish? Kluger. Anybody? You gotta unmute or put in the comments. It's interesting that that's the name he got. but his name was Rabbi Shlomo Kluger. And while you look that up or can tell me what it means, I will give you a little history on him. He was born in Poland, and but then eventually he assumed the chief rabbinate of the city of Brody, and he was there for 50 years. He wrote over 160 volumes of Torah, so it helps to be one of the few people back in the day who lived a long life. And so he was able to write many responses, hence he became one of the more famous rabbis. So Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, but more important, his influence carries on till today. One of his most famous students was a rabbi called Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. So the Soloveitchik dynasty, for those who know who that is, the Brisker dynasty, they were inspired by Rabbi Kluger. But then again, that's for the history buff. So Kluger means smarter, okay? And so Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, just to give you historical context, if you think of it in this way, the Jews living in Poland and that area really always looked at the German Jews and France in that area as trying to modernize Judaism, which had happened there. And don't forget, with the Industrial Revolution, or I should say modernity, 50% of Orthodox Jews left the fold, definitely in those areas. So you can understand why they were very wary. So let's take a look at text number 3. What Rabbi Kluger wants to tell us, how he's not so happy with this. So what does he say? Regarding your question, whether or not it is permissible to adopt, and notice how he says, the German practice of baking matzahs with the machine, heaven forbid that you should do such a thing. And for many reasons, which I will explain, God willing, one cannot cite a precedent from the practices of German community. Ouch, if there ever was one. Okay, tells you what he thinks about the German community. And Rabbi Kluger was joined by many, many other great rabbis of his time, the Gerer Rebbe, and the Rebbe of Tzanz, and the Sachachover Rebbe, and Avnei Nezer, and to an extent the Lubavitcher Rebbes at that time. Virtually all the Hasidic Rebbes opposed the machine-made matzah. And let's take a look at text number 4 by another rabbi, also written very sharp. There is a raging fire ignited within me when I see the broad acceptance of this innovation, which is a plague that is attacking and destroying the community from all quarters. Can you imagine? He's like, you're buying that man Hashemitz matzah, you're destroying our communities. There's going to be no more Jews left. If you eat, don't open that box. You can't imagine what's inside of it. I mean, it's laughable to us today, but
This lecture was brought to you by Shmura Matzah.
Yeah, this lecture was brought to you by Shmura Matzah Incorporated, right? So don't worry, we're going to get to the defense. So let's take a look. At the same time, let's read a rabbi who defends this position. We're going to get to the 4 main reasons why the rabbis at the time did not hold too kindly of it. So let's take a look at a defense just to see another rabbi. And this is the rabbi of Lvov, otherwise known as Lemberg, in Western Ukraine. I think today it's called Lviv, or maybe it's still called Lemberg. I'm not sure. I see Lviv in the news a lot. I'm not sure if it's the original Lvov. I'm a little bit confused, but unfortunately, it's been in the news. So this rabbi, who was the rabbi in Lvov, he says like this, as you can see on the screen: these matzot are kosher without any room for concern. Do not err in your hearts and talk falsehood in your souls that this is a novelty not in line with the law. For the truth of the matter is that the German communities have been using these machines for quite some time now. And God forbid for us to slander all of the German community and state that they are not eating kosher matzah. Thank heaven. There are many God-fearing and upright Jews among them who are faithful to the Torah and the mitzvot at large, and certainly with regard to the prohibition of eating chametz. So what he's saying is generally they're scrupulous, and definitely with regard to eating chametz. Let me just see if I can miss the chat over here. Okay. So, and he was joined by many, many others. However, the vast majority of Jews in the Polish, Western Ukrainian area war against the machine-made matzah. The debate became very heated. Rabbi Kluger himself wrote 10 letters defending his decision. The other rabbi wrote back 20 letters defending his decision, and pretty much every rabbi in his time, if you wanted to become popular or you thought you were popular, you had to write your dissertation onto why you didn't like the matzah. So why would they be against machine-made matzahs aside from modernity? Any other thoughts or reasons why would they be against machine-made matzahs? I'll give you a moment here. I'm going to sign into the Zoom on my phone also, so I can just run this a little more efficiently. But any thoughts? You can unmute
It could take too long. It
It
could
could take-
take longer.
You mean it would take longer, like more than 18 minutes?
Well, just putting it onto the machine. By the time, you roll out and it's done. If you then take it and you have to, does it roll it as well, or just put the holes in it?
Well, today the machines do all the steps. Back in the day, it did only some of them.
Yeah.
What about, would it have created a problem? Extra workers have been laid off because of,
Okay, yes, yep, we'll see that too.
You could also have if in the off season, if somebody unknowingly used it and put comments on it, and then that contaminated the matzah batches.
You're saying if you have matzah all year round, as opposed to,
Right, if it's baked all
Old
year
style.
round, then you're fine, but if there's ever a period where it's not used.
oh,
somebody-
you're saying the machines can get dirty while they
Right,
sit.
exactly. Yeah, you can have contamination on the machine.
So cleanliness, okay, yeah.
what about using something the equivalent of a pizza oven?
Can we use a pizza oven for matzah?
No.
I mean, that is the equivalent.
Oh, you make your own matzah.
If you want to make matzah pizza, okay.
No. What we're saying is, if we wanted to
delicious.
grow, right, matzah, once a year, couldn't you then,
Roll out a pizza oven.
or whatever it is?
Yeah,
that's
in theory, yes. A pizza oven is actually great for a matzah oven because they're so hot. I mean, in theory, you could probably kosherize it. Sounds a little crazy. But don't forget, back in the day, they didn't have dedicated matzah ovens. They probably would kosherize pizza oven or some other oven. Okay.
Nothing. It's some sort.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a look here. Let's take a look at the different reasons that exist. So we're gonna start with number one. Number one is cleanliness. So let's take a look at our screen. We're gonna look at text number 6. This is from Rabbi Chaim Halberstam. Rabbi Chaim, Tanza Rebbe, very famous person. It says like this. The words of Rabbi Mordechai Zev alone are enough to forbid the machine matzah, but we're not getting to reason yet. But he says he saw with his own eyes that it is impossible to properly clean the dough stuck to the machines in all the grooves, and this can lead to many problems. So when you go to a hand bakery, there's a lot of sandpaper there, especially today, by the way, they use machines also with sandpaper to clean. Machines, especially if you look at older machines, they definitely had the ability and propensity and possibility for getting dough stuck in it. There's a lot of little nooks and crannies, and they didn't have the cleaning ability that we have today. And so the defending rabbis did concede. So this is what some of the rabbis were saying. There's no way you can keep it clean, especially back in the day when it first started. The defending rabbis did concede the inside of the machines can be a problem. But they said that, they can clean it. Another interesting thing I want to point out, when originally they made machine-made matzahs, they made them round. So what was happening was they would come out of the machines not round, and then they would cut off pieces of dough. And so obviously that creates excess dough, which is, of course, another problem. So let's take a look here at text number 7 also. Regarding the matter of machine-made matzah, the primary concern is that when the matzahs are fashioned in the traditional round shape, leaving over pieces of various sizes, these are then used repeatedly in the machine in the next batch, and the trimmings of that in the following batch. In this situation, there are certainly real concern of actual chametz. But if the matzahs are made in a square shape, this is not a concern. So it's interesting. If you're making a machine matzah, you have to think people are used to something, marketing. This is talking about before Manischewitz got into marketing, and we'll discuss that. But originally, machine-made matzahs were made round because people just couldn't fathom square. It took a while for square matzahs to take hold. So one issue was cleanliness. Very simple problem, which probably as the machines got better, that problem became less of a problem. However, there is another problem which is possible to apply still today. And that is that machines may generate extra heat that is not necessarily applicable by how humans do it. In other words, like this. There's a lot of things that are tradition. Okay, so the tradition is 18 minutes is what makes something chametz. However, that tradition applies very specifically to water with flour. So for example, if you mix orange juice with flour, okay, traditionally we say no, it may become chametz, it may become leavened sooner. Okay, we don't have a tradition, it's 18 minutes, it could be quicker. So anytime you're going to change up how we're doing things, there's a possible worry that maybe the leavening process will happen quicker. And the same thing is with the industrial machines. Maybe when the original rabbis have figured out it's 18 minutes, they said it's 18 minutes was only with hands, but with machines that generate a certain type of heat, it's possible that it's quicker than 18 minutes, and that can create a problem. Let's take a look over here. This is from the fifth Chabad Rabbi. He says, and again, mind you, this is, the fifth Chabad Rabbi lived between 1860 and 1920. In addition to the other concerns, I heard a number of years ago from Rabbi Yechiel Halpern that he was told by a God-fearing expert chemist that according to chemistry, as soon as dough touches the metal of the wheels of the machine, it immediately ferments. Historically, they didn't have any metal in the Matzah bakery, or not a lot. I remember when I went to Chicago, when I was there, when they had a Matzah baker, I heard it since closed, maybe there's a new one, but they had started using a hole puncher for the matzah. I remember people discussing whether it was, whether that should be okay or not, because again, it's metal touching the matzah, not wood. So there's debate about that. Many places just use wood. They clean it or one-time use, throw it out. So again, this is presenting you another option, saying, with these machines, they present new problems. We haven't seen them. Maybe it becomes chametz earlier. And here we have Rabbi Kluger himself. We'll talk about the heat of the machines. Another issue is that due to the pressure of the machine, it heats up and warms up the dough. Thus, in my opinion, it is not a good thing at all. He really had it for those machines. So he was worried about fermentation happening earlier. So again, one issue was too hard to clean. Again, I would say today, probably that's something we can take care of. Number two, the unknown. Maybe machines generate more heat. Obviously, today's machines can probably have less heat, but there's definitely elements in the machine that one can argue still today, possibly, touching metal is maybe a bad thing. Okay. Now there's a third one that was mentioned over here. And this was an issue anywhere you would go during the Industrial Revolution, people saying, running water is terrible. How's a water carrier going to make his money, right? So he points out in text number 9, and it was a problem in the beginning, like any industrial revolution. It did take away a livelihood from certain people. However, in the long term, of course, everybody finds something else to do. You need to be the person who knows how to fix machines now, right? You know how many people are in IT today, right? Computers are not really replacing people. We just have more people fixing computers. So we have lots of computers, lots of people fixing computers. Then you have people trying to kill computers with viruses, and then people trying to save them with viruses. It's enough for everybody to do. God will take care of everybody, okay? But anyways, text number 9 says like this: it is not ethical to usurp the livelihood of the poor who look forward to these jobs to help fund the many holiday expenses. So it was obviously a holiday centric thing, and some people who needed a little more money for the holiday, Passover is an expensive holiday, they needed the dough, no pun intended, and so they would work in a matzah bakery and have enough dough to pay for their Passover expenses. So 3 reasons so far: cleanliness, the unknown of dealing with a machine and fermentation, and dealing with the poor. And we have a 4th concern here. And the 4th concern is the human element of being able to feel the dough. So what does that mean? So here's the rabbi. This was Rabbi Shlomo Kluger again. One of his other issues was, I've been a rabbi overseeing the fulfillment of the law for over 50 years now. Thank God. And there has never been a year during which whole kernels and bits of wheat were not found in the matzah. This is not discernible when the dough is whole, and it is only found later when the workers roll the dough. If the matzah will be produced by the machine, who will feel the dough and thereby notice stray kernels? So in other words, if a kernel is not crushed, it doesn't really bake properly, and then there's a possibility that it can become chametz at a later time. You have a whole kernel mixed into your dough, you get a little water on it, it can become we're not talking about gebrux here. I mean, if you don't keep gebrux, right? But regardless, so he's saying if you don't have the human element, there are other issues that the human element can get. So we have the 4 issues, 4 halachic issues, and the 5th issue that I was discussing earlier was, of course, just the general issue of modernity. Modernity was always a problem. Change in the Orthodox world is always something that it comes slowly. For those who know about timers, Shabbos timers, that was a big debate at one point. And so many people saw the machines as a sign of modernity and changing Judaism. You can imagine something so basic as a round matzah, be using it for thousands of years and suddenly it's square. It could smack all the Jews sitting in Poland as funny. But now let us get to a problem, which is a problem regardless of whether you take care of all those previous nitty-gritty detail problems. In other words, even if you make sure that the machine is clean, and even if you have determined that it will not ferment, and even if all the poor people have jobs, and even if you have machinery that can scan your matzah for any stray kernels, and even if we're in a day today where we know that machine-made matzah is not what's going to destroy all the Jewish communities, nevertheless, there is still a reason to have handmade matzah. So let us take a look at the next section. Why would we have handmade matzah? And the simple reason is shmura, or lishma. So let's explain what that means. Let's first take a look at the verse. This is from Exodus. We quoted it earlier, but let us read. It says like this: "And you shall watch over the unleavened cakes. For on this day I have taken your legions out of Egypt, and you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting statute." So the commentaries point out, what does it mean that when it says, you shall watch over the unleavened cakes? Does it just mean you have to watch them to make sure they don't become chametz? Don't forget, don't become leavened. You have to remember, every word in the Torah is important. The moment you say matzot, the word matzot means in Hebrew that it's not leavened bread. So why would the Torah have to tell you, you have to guard that it should be not leavened bread? If the word matzot means not leavened bread, why the additional injunction to say you shall guard it that it shall not become leavened? And so the commentaries say, and the Talmud explains, that the verse means that when we make the matzah, we have to guard it to make sure it does not become chametz, with the conscious intention that the work of baking the matzah needs to be done for the sake of a mitzvah. And I'll say that again. When we are guarding the matzah and baking it and make sure it does not become leavened, we have to do it with the conscious intention that we are doing it for the sake of the mitzvah of eating matzah on Passover. If you go to a matzah bakery, not a machine one too, as we'll explain a little later, but a handmade matzah bakery, before everybody starts rolling the dough, everybody calls out together, l'shem matzot mitzvah. We are now baking for the sake of doing a mitzvah. And the same thing applies. Certain mitzvahs, you have to do it with intention. In other words, if you give charity without any intention of giving it, you have done the mitzvah of charity. Certain mitzvahs need to be done l'shma, for the perfect intention. A good example of this that the Talmud always brings out is a divorce bill. Judaism, a divorce bill. Okay. It says, it's a funny example. It says, let's say there are two people in town and they have the same name and their wives have the same name. Okay. All right. So the Sam number one and Sam number two. Okay. So Sam number one, Sam I am. All right. So Sam number one, whose wife is called Fran, and Sam number two, his wife is called Fran. Okay. So Sam, he has a bill of divorce in Jewish law written for him to give to his wife. Then he makes up with his wife. He comes to the second Sam. He goes, hey, I wrote this bill of divorce for my wife, but I'm actually not divorcing her. Do you by any chance need it? Oh, and Sam number two says, oh, actually, I was just going to divorce her. I'll pay you 50% of it. Just what I needed, And so he wants to give now this bill of divorce to his wife. Jewish law says you cannot do that because the bill of divorce had to be written with the intention for this man and that woman, even if the names match. Okay. So what that means is action. Following to the law, letter of the law is not always enough. Sometimes you need to have intention. So in this case, the matzah, what the Talmud learns from here is that the actions of doing the actions of guarding the matzah from becoming leavened have to be done with conscious intention that it's being done for a mitzvah. Thus, let's say you baked matzah because you like matzah, and so you baked it to eat it for July 4th. And then you decided, you know what, this matzah can stay fresh for half a year. I'm going to eat it next year, Pesach. You would not be allowed to eat it on the Passover Seder. So again, the matzah that you eat on the Passover Seder has to be done with the intention that you will be eating it. Oh, I didn't realize I keep sharing the screen. It has to be done with the intention that you will be eating it on the Passover Seder. Let's read from the Talmud itself. If the Talmud is too confusing for you, that's okay, but I just gave you the idea. One might think that he can discharge his obligation of eating matzah on Pesach with the loaves of thanks offering. Those were loaves that these were matzot that were made in the temple, and wafers of a Nazarite, which were matzah. Therefore, it is stated, and you shall guard the unleavened bread, teaching that it must be unleavened bread, which is guarded for the sake of fulfilling the obligation of eating unleavened bread, thus excluding this which is guarded not for the sake of unleavened bread, but for the sake of sacrifice, for it was not made with the matzah of Pesach mitzvah in mind, rather for the mitzvah, for the matzah of sacrifice. So therefore, now the question will become, if we understand this, that the matzot have to be made for the sake of a mitzvah, can we say that machine-made matzahs are created with the intention of for the sake of the mitzvah? Any thoughts? Can we say that machine-made matzahs are made with the intention that to fulfill the obligation of Pesach? What would you say?
What if they
I would say yes.
mitzvah matzah before flipping on the machine?
Okay, good. What if they do it before they press the button? Okay. Any other thoughts? Somebody else said something over here? Heard somebody on the Zoom.
It was me, Rabbi.
Yes, Anita?
I just thought it would be if you're deciding and planning, deciding and going for it right away, then you would, in my
All right, the
opinion.
question is when you're doing it in a machine, because machines don't think. So Jacob says they don't think yet, right? Correct. They don't think yet. Jacob says, okay, maybe the thought process happens when they are when you flip the switch. Okay,
You turn it on.
fair enough. Someone else?
When you're putting the dough on the machine,
Good.
that is your act, and you are doing it for the mitzvah of making the matzah.
Yep.
But I want to know, why are you putting holes in it? Where did this come from?
The holes in the matzah.
Yes, they didn't make holes in the matzah originally. It was like
When they wanted it to be holy.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
holy. Oh,
That's my job.
Like everything else, Judaism, people wanted to make sure it's really not going to rise. They put holes in it to really make sure it didn't rise. Originally, you're right; it didn't have holes in it. That's correct.
so if
But
that
I
light
don't
was-
want to go too far in that, because even Manischewitz makes it with the holes. It's become part of what everybody likes, anyways.
Yeah, no,
It's fun
it
trying to get
goes
it to
back,
break along the perforations.
Yes.
and it goes back to teaching the people. The rabbis wanted to make sure the people understood what they were doing, so they
Yeah.
put the holes in it so it couldn't rise. I'll accept
One
that.
day we can discuss. One day we can discuss the evolution of handmade matzah, which is an interesting discussion in it of itself. The handmade matzah we eat today is not always how it looked, but that's not our discussion today. Mostly about the machine-made matzah. So let's take a look over here at text number 12, and talking about can machines think? All right, the machine-made matzot. Let's scroll down a little bit. Oops. Scroll a little too far. Let's see what it says. Okay, so it's like this. The machine-made matzot are certainly not qualified to charge the biblical obligation of eating matzah, for the accepted halachic ruling is that matzot made by a minor, for someone who is without mental stability, even with a competent adult supervision, is not qualified for matzot and mitzvah, for they lack proper awareness and thus cannot truly have intent. Accordingly, a machine is certainly no better than the actions of a minor and will not qualify even with human supervision. The implication of various halachic authorities is that for matzot of mitzvah, it is necessary that from the beginning of kneading until the actual baking, everything must be done by a Jewish adult. Accordingly, machine matzah will certainly not qualify. So what he's saying is, just as if you have a child making the mitzvah, making the matzah, it does not count. If you want to do it through a machine, it doesn't work. Of course, the machine defenders will say, Well, just as you use a rolling pin, right? Use a rolling pin. Well, it's not a hand, it's a rolling pin, right? Just as you have an oven, it's not a person blowing until it gets too hot. So they said, so you press the button, you're doing something. The opponents will counter that pressing the button only really has an effect in the first few seconds, the first few moments of electricity. And accordingly, there was a big debate going back and forth. Now, regardless, just want to point out, even those who said you should not eat it on the Seder because there was no intent, did not necessarily say it wasn't kosher for Pesach. They were just saying, for the Seder, it doesn't count because it's not made for the mitzvah. And this goes back to what I said earlier. The mitzvah of eating matzah is only at the Seder night. And even then, only a certain amount, not all the matzah you eat that night. So let's take a look at a matzah defender, a machine defender. This is Rabbi Akiva Sofer, from the famous Sofer family, and he says like this: regarding machine-made matzot, if a human inserts the plug into the outlet, connecting the electrical wires and creating an electrical current, it can be considered human action that governs the entire baking process. This action is effective for the purpose of guarding the matzah. So all of this is the debate that went on in Europe. And here we're going to take a step into a little bit of history and really of Manischewitz, because despite the debates going on around machine matzah was not super popular in any Jewish circle until Manischewitz really industrialized it, as we'll explain soon. So again, debates were going on for a long time. The machines were around. They weren't necessarily the best machines like we have today, and which created obviously the ability for some rabbis to come out there and say, poke fun at them, they're not so clean. Additionally, many rabbis, of course, were against the whole idea that, there's no intent. So, how many people want to eat matzah that they can't eat at the Seder, Generally, the Hasidic communities were very much against the machine-made matzah. Outside the Hasidic communities, there you had a larger debate. Within the Hasidic communities, it was pretty much solidified very much against machine-made matzah. Now let's take a look at Manischewitz. Anybody knows a little bit about the history of Manischewitz? So the name Manischewitz is very interesting. In the year 1886, a rabbi called Rabbi Abramson from a Lithuanian town called Salant. Now, Salant is famous because the birth of the Musar movement is there, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, for those who don't know. But anyways, the Musar movement is a Jewish ethics movement. So a man called Rabbi Abramson in 1886 purchased a passport of a dead man. Very, very common if you wanted to escape Europe. Why he wanted to escape Europe in 1886 is subject to debate. Historians are not sure. Some say he was requested by the community. But regardless, he purchased a passport of a dead man, and he was now known as Dov Ber Manischewitz. So it's very interesting how the whole Manischewitz dynasty was because of the only way to get into Europe was buying a dead man's passport. So he bought a passport of Dov Ber Manischewitz. He came to Cincinnati in America, and he served there as a ritual slaughterer and also a Jewish peddler, which was very, very common. Of course, as you can imagine, being the ritual slaughterer, he was in general involved in kosher food, and he realized that there was a demand for matzah. There weren't these giant bakeries back then. And at some point, he decided to create a matzah bakery. And in fact, an interesting tidbit, when he first started his matzah bakery, he had a competitor in town, and he wrote to his father in Salant, in Poland, can you send a letter that my competitor should shut down his business because it's killing my business? And his father, coming from the Musar movement, said, just don't fight, just let everything be. And of course, that was good advice because he obviously became very wealthy. So our friend Manischewitz, he realized there was a market not only for the Jewish market of matzah, but actually at that time, Cleveland was becoming a place for many people going west. They would stop there, Cincinnati, many people would stop there. And so matzah is a very shelf-stable food. unfortunately, but it's a very shelf-stable food. And so many people, Gentiles, would buy this matzah because he said, oh, this is great for our trip, to go out west. And so this Manischewitz, he figured out how to turn matzah into a successful industry, selling it not only to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. By 1900, Rabbi Dober Manischewitz opened up a massive factory. He switched from coal ovens to gas ovens, allowed for better temperature control. When he built this new oven, this gas oven, it was actually at that time the largest oven on earth. Can you imagine? Largest oven on earth at a certain point was a Manischewitz oven. And instead of merely using the machines to roll the dough, he was the first one to really have it do the entire process, from the mixing, perforating, cutting, and soon his factory was turning out 75,000 pounds of matzah a day. Much of it initially purchased by Gentiles. And unlike other matzahs, which were, even if they were, made by a machine, they were put in an oven by hand. These matzahs, as they are today, were uniform, standardized, exactly the same every single time. And originally, Manischewitz produced matzah for non-kosher for Passover use, where lishma was not a problem, where intention was not a problem. But eventually, he was a very shrewd businessman. And then his son took over in 1914 when he passed away. And they were capable of producing, by the year 1920, 1.25 million matzahs a day. Okay, so by the year 1920, I know a lot of people put out the year 1920. That's when they became very, very popular. The company also expanded to making matzah mel and other matzah products. As long as matzah was as expensive as it was, shmur matzah, handmade matzah, you couldn't have, matzah balls because it's just too expensive, to take expensive matzah and make matzah mel out of it. But he's the one that made all these other products because he had now made it an industrial package, which can now make all these other types of ideas. Well, an interesting thing I read up today written by Professor Jonathan Sarna, a famous historian. He wrote up a very interesting thing, how Rabbi Manischewitz was a very shrewd businessman, in that he realized that he would not get many endorsements from the European rabbis where he came from. And he actually built himself ties with the Israeli centers of Torah study, to the point where he actually had a yeshiva called the Manischewitz Yeshiva. And his purpose there was so that rabbis would come out and say they graduated from the Manischewitz Yeshiva, and all of this would add prestige to his product. Oh, look, there's Manischewitz rabbis. It's got to be the Manischewitz product is very prestigious. So the reason why we know this is very interesting. I was reading this. The reason why we know a lot of these things, he did a lot of philanthropy in Israel. It was both charity because he loved Israel. He himself studied in Israel. His kids studied in Israel. But it was also a business perspective, because back in the day, he was donating money to these yeshivas in Israel, and he was getting business tax deductions for it. And the yeshivas he was giving to did not have, they were not tax exempt, right? So he was taking it as a business expense. And the IRS took him to court saying, well, you're giving charity. That's not a business expense. And in court, he proved, and the court agreed with him, that although, yes, it is also charity, but it's also prudent business expense to create a prestige around his products. Very interesting from the court case. We know about this, how he had multiple motives in his charitable contributions to Israel. And so he had many, many prestigious rabbis come by, and he really built ties with the Israeli rabbis. And the other thing you have to realize is this was in America. In America, they didn't have as many hardliners at that point in time. There weren't very many. The only hardliners against machine matzah was the Hasidic Jews. There weren't that many in America when he started. So he had a much easier, if Manischewitz had tried to start in Europe, I don't think it would be the same as it is in America. He was a very brilliant businessman, did many, many different things to really make it to the point where many people actually preferred Manischewitz matzah over any other matzah because of the cleanliness of the factory. And he would put out a lot of, in fact, he had different advertisements. The ones in English spoke about the cleanliness. The ones in Hebrew spoke about all the rabbis that endorsed his. He was very, very shrewd. He knew exactly how to cater to all his businesses.
Even Hanukkah ones.
In 1990, the Manischewitz company passed out of family control. They sold it for $42.5 million to Kluger and Co. Since it has been sold twice more, in 1998 for $124 million. And finally, in 2007, it was sold to Harbinger Capital Partners. So it is owned by mass companies today, but nevertheless, it maintains the same standard of kashrut and the same standard of cleanliness that it always had. So that's the history behind the Manischewitz matzah. Where does that bring us to today? So that's the rise of Manischewitz matzah. Really, it has a lot to do with America, honestly. America and Israel really pivoting you have to remember, Israel used to be second fiddle. The rabbis in Israel were second fiddle originally to the rabbis in Europe. And so it's an interesting thing when you look at it, America and Israel both rose in prominence together. And they kind of made this partnership, and it worked out really well for them. And Manischewitz, in some way, played a powerful role in this growth and rise of the prestige of the Jewish communities in America and Israel. So all this being said, I said earlier I was going to mention something about shmura, about guarded. So Manischewitz matzah, even if you are of the opinion that pressing the button for the mitzvah is enough, first of all, within Manischewitz matzah, there is shmura matzah itself. You can buy shmura matzah. Now, the moment you buy a machine matzah that's called shmura, it becomes more expensive. And on top of that, if you buy a shmura matzah that they call it shmura from the time of cutting, okay? So what that means is, at what point is everybody looking after the flour for the sake of the mitzvah? Is it from the moment it gets into the factory? Is it from the moment they grind it, the flour, or is it from the moment they cut it? Handmade shmura matzah is always guarded from the moment they cut the wheat. In other words, they go out to the fields, they make sure it's been dry for a couple of days, then they cut the wheat. There's a rabbi there checking the kernels, making sure it's very dry. Then with the grinding is also done. They're watching the flour all this time. It's a long, long, long process, okay? Handmade shmura matzah has that long process. Machine matzah can also have that long process, but you would have to check, and it is a more expensive machine matzah. And so you have to make sure that it says on it, shmura from the time of cutting, which is the most preferable type of machine-made matzah if you're going to use it for your Seder. That being said, Chabad and many other Hasidic Jews push that at the very least one should eat handmade shmura matzah because it definitely has the most intent. Machine-made matzah are great. They got the buttons, but if you want to get the most human involvement, you want the handmade matzah made by a person at the very least for the Seder. And the Seder matzah is what's known as the bread of faith and the bread of healing. And so if you want faith in your life, you want healing in life, you want somebody's intention of when they did it. Helach manya. Yeah, you want the intention of the people inside of it. And if we want to put it this way, going back to the story of my great grandfather, where he was told to this is just a nice idea to take with, because tonight was a lot of history. Well, my great grandfather, I spoke about him when he came to yeshiva. He was, they said about him, he was a little coarse. And then when he put sweat and tears and energy in baking the matzahs, he became a little bit more refined. I think that's the same thing for this bread of faith and the bread of healing, is that faith is not meant to come easy. It's not supposed to be you press a button, it comes easy. It's supposed to be with work and toil and physical labor. Faith doesn't come, although we can discuss what is faith really mean. Making faith a part of you, let's say it that way, making faith a part of your life and a part of you who you are. If we want to eat this bread of faith and bring faith into our lives, we want to do it with the real deal. We want to do it with a handmade matzah to show us that our faith is something that we have to work on. It's not a machine made, something that we work on and something that we bring into our lives. We don't want to just be Jews of habit. We don't want to be Jews of robotic nature, where the matzahs always look exactly the same every single time. Machines have their place, but certain things you got to have the real deal. And so Chabad and many others have made a campaign to make sure that every single Jew can have a little bit of shmura matzah, handmade shmura matzah for the Seder. So if you need some, we have it here. And at the very least, eat a little bit. for your Seder. And that is my story about the history and the rise of machine-made matzah. It's quite an interesting thing.
Can
And
I ask, why is Shamura Motza
yes,
like a frisbee, as hard and indigestible?
yeah. So I understand a lot. Some people tell me they love the shmur matzah and they can never get enough. Some people says that it's too much for them. But that's why I say at the very least, try and eat a half a shmur matzah at the Seder, or a half of a shmur matzah. Every single person at your Seder should eat the real deal. You want to do the mitzvah in the best way possible. Definitely, handmade shmur matzah fulfills all opinions. So if you want to fulfill all opinions, definitely try and eat a little bit of that handmade shmur matzah at the Seder. I understand square stuff tastes a lot better; it's less dry. But at the very least, and that round stuff doesn't make very good matzah pizza either. I know it's very burnt and charred. But at the very least, everybody at your Seder this year should have a little bit of a handmade shmur matzah. I want to share one last story.
Bread of affliction.
Yeah, I'll end up with a story. It's a story. Rabbi Shlomo Kunin, who is today the head Chabad rabbi of California, the state of California, which means he has to be a little bit interesting because California is interesting. He's quite an interesting character. He's quite energetic and thinks very out of the box. But regardless, he grew up in the Bronx, and the Rebbe on Erev Pesach, before Pesach, would give matzah to give out to people, and the Rebbe gave him some matzah and said, I want you to bring this matzah. You're going to the Bronx for the Seder. I want you to go to this in this house and this in the street. Go bring matzah to this family. So he knocks on the door, and it's getting close to the Seder, and the door opens. He sees a big muscular guy there with some tattoos on his arm, and he sees bread on the table, and he says, I came to bring you matzah from the Rebbe. And the guy looks at him and says, oh, thank you so much. And then Rabbi Kunin says, I thought to myself, if the Rebbe wants me to bring him matzah, he probably wants me to make sure he has a Seder too. So he says, let's cover the bread over there. Let's sit down. And so he calls his whole family in, and into the house walks this guy's wife and two beautiful daughters. But as Rabbi Kunin says, it was very evident that his family's two daughters were blind. And they start holding a Seder, and throughout the dinner, Rabbi Kunin finds out, or I should say the Seder, he says whatever he knew by heart, he found out that basically what's this couple's connection to the Rebbe. They had two daughters, and the wife was now pregnant with a third child, and the doctors were saying if you have two blind daughters, you should abort. You should go for an abortion. And so they wrote to different people, and I think this guy's business partner told him, why don't you write to the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Of course, he was not religious. So he wrote to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Rebbe wrote him back, you shouldn't do the abortion. You should make sure to continue to term, and everything will be okay. And he says, and look, your Rebbe is thinking about me even tonight. He's sending me this matzah. So then Rabbi Kunin realized, the matzah of Pesach is called the bread of faith, and it's called the bread of healing. You'll eat this matzah and everything will be okay. They sat the night and they sat with that matzah. And of course, the child was born healthy, seeing child. But that was just one anecdote of how the Rebbe really looked out that every single person should have matzah. When it would get close to Passover, he would make sure some packages of matzah all over the world. There are so many stories of Jews who came back to their Judaism through matzah. I think there was one. There was a Chabad.org article a couple of years ago, how the rabbi in Oklahoma, he put a billboard, don't pass over Passover, one of those billboards. And there was a kid riding in the bus who saw that sign, and 30 years later, he through that started his religious journey. And 30 years later, he went into the rabbi from Oklahoma's son. He got connected with that Chabad, and anyways, it's just interesting, the connections. But regardless, the point is that matzah is the bread of faith. We should all make sure, if we want to get that faith in our lives, get that handmade shmur matzah, bite into it, enjoy the faith. Remember, faith is something that takes hard work, deep work, difficult work, but it can be done, and may we all be successful at our faith, as Manischewitz was at popularizing his matzah. So thank you all, and I'll stick around.